sister-in-law is getting married to my ex and expects me to agree to a list of her demands. When I refuse, she spins this story to everyone how I am still in love with my ex and trying to sabotage their relationship. So I decide to do this, and now my SIL's wedding is being called off. My sister-in-law is marrying my ex. Yes, you read that right, and trust me, it's just as wild as it sounds. Years ago, I dated a guy named Peter. Honestly, calling him one of the biggest cowards I've ever met feels like an understatement. He was toxic, controlling, and downright abusive. After I left him, I met with my husband. He's everything Peter wasn't: kind, supportive, and loving. We've been happily married for the past 2 years. Just a month ago, sister-in-law announced that she was engaged. This came as a bit of a surprise since we didn't even know she was seriously dating someone. She lives in another city and hasn't been home in a while. Naturally, my husband and mother-in-law were caught off guard. They were happy for her, of course, but also a little bit concerned because she hadn't mentioned anything about this mystery man to any of us. Fast forward to this week, sister-in-law came home and everyone was buzzing with questions about her fiancé. We all wanted to know who this guy was, how they met, what he was like, and why she kept him a secret for so long. She told us his name was Peter. At first, I didn't think too much of it. I mean, Peter's a pretty common name, right? I just assumed it was a coincidence that her fiancé and my ex happened to share the same name. Sister-in-law went on to talk about how wonderful this Peter was. She painted such a glowing picture of him, calling him thoughtful, hardworking, and someone who treated her like a queen. She also mentioned that he'd be flying in for their engagement party, which would be the first time the whole family would get to meet him. Everyone was excited, myself included. I was genuinely happy for her and looking forward to seeing this man who had swept her off her feet. So last night, my husband and I attended her engagement party, expecting nothing more than a joyful evening celebrating her big news. But as we walked into the venue, my heart dropped into my stomach. There, standing next to my sister-in-law, was Peter, my ex. The sight of him made me freeze on the spot like a deer caught in the headlights. My husband, who knows all about Peter and everything he put me through, also stopped in his tracks. He didn't say anything at first, but I could see the tension in his face and feel it in the way he clenched his hand around mine. It was as if we both couldn't believe what we were seeing. As if on cue, my sister-in-law walked over to greet us. She was beaming with happiness, completely oblivious to my history with her fiancé. She began introducing Peter to us. Now, while both me and my husband were surprised to see him, my ex, on the other hand, didn't look surprised at all. In fact, he had this sly smile on his face, like he'd been waiting for this moment to see me. It was unsettling to say the least. My husband was the first to break the silence. With a sharp tone, he asked his sister why Peter was there and what exactly she was doing with him. Sister-in-law looked taken back, her smile faltering as confusion washed over her face. She explained a bit hesitantly that Peter was her fiancé, the man she had been raving about for weeks. That's when my husband, in a calm but firm voice, told his sister that Peter was my ex, the same man I had dated years ago. Sister-in-law's eyes went wide with shock, darting between me and Peter as the reality of the situation sunk in. I could feel her confusion and disbelief hanging thick in the air. I, on the other hand, couldn't even bring myself to look at Peter. Every part of me wanted to turn around and walk out of that venue, but my feet felt like they were glued to the floor. This is when Peter let out a laugh. He looked directly at me and said, "Oh, what a coincidence. I had no clue you were married into this family. I guess now you and I are going to be family also, right?" I could feel my stomach churn at his words. He really had no idea that I was a part of this family. Now, we were going to be family? The thought of being anywhere near him, let alone being tied to him as part of the same family, made me want to throw up. Peter didn't stop there. He turned to my husband and sister-in-law, putting on this fake, over-the-top expression of surprise. "I mean, wow, this is as much of a surprise to me as it is to you guys," he said, acting like this whole thing was some bizarre joke. "Sure, it's a little awkward that I used to date her, but honestly, I don't care. I'm completely over it." Sister-in-law, still trying to process what was happening, finally asked him the question I could see brewing in her mind. "Wait, Peter, why didn't you ever tell me about this? We've talked about our past before. Why didn't you mention that you dated her?" Peter just shrugged. He turned to look at me with this smug, pointed expression and said, "Well, she was just not worth mentioning." My face flushed with anger at Peter's remark. Not worth mentioning? The audacity. This was the same man who lived in my apartment rent-free, jobless and utterly dependent on me for over a year and a half. How dare he diminish everything I had done for him, as if I was some insignificant blip in his life. My mind raced back to those dark days, the sacrifices I made for him, and the way he repaid me by being a manipulative parasite. It all started after Peter's mother had passed away. He was devastated, and to make matters worse, his father remarried almost immediately. His dad got their family home and kicked Peter out, leaving him with nowhere to go. At the time, Peter and I were dating, but we had no such plans to live together. But since I cared about him and wanted to help him, I offered to let him stay with me. The only condition I set was that we would split the bills and responsibilities. Seemed fair, reasonable, even, but little did I know I was signing up for a nightmare. In the beginning, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He was grieving, and I could see how much losing his mother and his family home had hurt him. He'd occasionally miss work because he wasn't in the right headspace, and I didn't push him. I told myself he just needed time to heal from the grief of losing his mother, and I wanted to be there for him. I wanted to be the supportive girlfriend who stood by her man when he was at his lowest. But what started as him taking a few days off spiraled into something far worse. Within months, Peter had stopped going to work altogether. At first, he made excuses. He wasn't feeling well. His boss was too demanding and he needed time to sort himself out. Then came the inevitable. He got fired. Whenever I brought up the idea of finding another job, he would deflect. "You don't understand," he'd say. "I'm all alone in this world. I just need your support right now and not be worried about looking for a job. Don't you love me?" Looking back, I realized how manipulative he was, preying on my sympathy and guilt to keep me from holding him accountable. I was so blinded by my desire to help him that I didn't see how one-sided everything had become. While I was out working long hours to pay the rent, put food on the table, and keep the lights on, Peter was at home. And what was he doing? Watching TV, playing video games, and lounging in bed all day. The man didn't even bother to clean up after himself. I'd come home exhausted, only to find the apartment a mess, and Peter waiting for me to make dinner. You would think that someone in Peter's position, unemployed, living off someone else's generosity, would at least be grateful for the meals I offered him. But, no. Instead of appreciating the meals I made, Peter would complain constantly. Every single day, it was the same story. "This doesn't taste like how my mom used to make it." He would go on and on and on about how his mother used to be a phenomenal cook and that I was not good enough like her. I would tell him that if he didn't like my cooking, he was welcome to make his own meals. This would then offend him. "I'm not saying I don't appreciate your effort," he would say. "I just think you could try harder to get better at cooking. I'm giving you tips so you can improve. That's all." Peter was also constantly worried that I would leave him for someone else. Every day, he demanded that I send him my location no matter where I was or what I was doing. If I ever missed an update, even by a few minutes, my phone would start buzzing with relentless calls and texts from him. "Where are you? Who are you with? Why can't you pick up my calls?" he would demand. It was exhausting. Eventually, I hit my breaking point with him. I sat him down and told him we needed to talk. I didn't explicitly say I wanted to break up, but I made it clear that I wanted us to live separately. I told him how I was tired of holding everything down and didn't want to be responsible for taking care of him any longer. "I think we both need some space," I told him, hoping he'd take it as a wake-up call to change his ways. However, this made Peter very angry. He started shouting and yelling at me like a man unhinged. He accused me that I must have found someone else. According to him, the only reason I dare ask him to move out was so that I could sleep with another man in my house. I pointed out to him how ridiculous his accusations were. I even told him that I would help him find a place of his own so he could move out soon. But instead of listening, Peter doubled down. "You have no right to ask me to leave," he shouted, his face red with rage. "I'm your partner. It's your duty to take care of me, especially when I'm still suffering because of my family. Do you have any idea how much I've been through?" It was infuriating. He wasn't taking responsibility for anything, instead playing the victim card yet again. I refused to let him manipulate me this time. "I've done more than my share for you, Peter," I snapped. "I'm done being taken for granted. You need to go." That week, Peter eventually moved out. I thought maybe, just maybe, he might finally accept the situation, but my relief was short-lived. Without my permission, he used my card to withdraw a couple $100 from my bank account. When I saw the bank statement, my blood boiled. I had completely forgotten he still had my card, and he took full advantage of it before leaving. After everything I had done for him, supporting him financially, emotionally, and even offering to help him move, this was how he repaid me? Stealing from me on his way out? It was a slap in the face and it confirmed everything I already knew about Peter. He was selfish, entitled and incapable of appreciating anyone who cared for him. When I questioned him about it, he acted oblivious at first and refused to accept that he had taken the money. I threatened to take him to the police, and this is when Peter scared me by saying how he would leak all the private pictures and videos he had of me if I didn't let him have the money. I was stunned. Peter continued to reveal that he had stored all our private moments in his drive and that he would send it to my family and friends and even post them online just to put me in my place. I was appalled. How could someone stoop so low? I had stood by him when he was at his lowest, supported him financially, cooked for him, cleaned up after him. And this was how he chose to repay me, not just by stealing my money, but by threatening to destroy my life in the most vile way imaginable. Peter wasn't just a coward or a manipulator. He was dangerous. At that moment, I realized I was dealing with someone who had no moral compass and no sense of decency. I vowed that from that day forward, I wanted nothing to do with him. I broke off with him and stopped all communications with him. I let him get away with my stolen money because I felt it was not worth fighting with him. Since that day, I had never been in contact with him. Fast forward to now, Peter standing in front of me with his hands around my husband's sister, casually telling them how I had meant nothing to him, which is why he had never mentioned me to her. Seeing him in front of me was like ripping open an old wound I thought had long since healed. The betrayal, the manipulation, the threats, it all came rushing back in an instant. Fortunately, my husband was there, and he could see that I was upset. He informed his sister that we needed to go and made an excuse for the both of us so we could leave right then and there. My sister-in-law looked confused and worried as she kept asking us why we needed to leave in the middle of her party, but my husband firmly told her that we would talk later. Ever since that night, my sister-in-law has been absolutely relentless. She's made it crystal clear that she's furious with me for walking out of her engagement party without a proper explanation. In her eyes, this was somehow a personal insult to her and even more infuriatingly to Peter. She's been calling and texting nonstop, demanding an apology from both me and my husband. According to her, we ruined her big night by overreacting and blowing things out of proportion, even though we laughed quietly and didn't cause any drama at the venue. It's infuriating. Anyway, I am on Reddit today because here's the thing. On one hand, I can't just sit back and watch her marry a man like Peter without warning her about the kind of person he is. She has a right to know the truth before it's too late. But on the other hand, I fear that if I speak up, she'll see it as an attack on her relationship and cut me and my husband off entirely. She might think I'm bitter about my past with Peter. So, Reddit, AITA? Update 1. To answer a few questions, I was with Peter for over 3 years, but the time he actually lived with me was about 1.5 years. I know that a lot of people in my situation would have gone straight to the police to get their money back after Peter stole from me. I knew I had the option to go to the police, and maybe I should have, but I didn't though. When Peter threatened that he would leak my pictures, it absolutely terrified me. First and foremost, I come from a very religious family and grew up in a very controlling environment. This is probably why I was attracted to someone like Peter, who was equally controlling. I was young and naive, and the pictures Peter had of us were private, personal moments. Never in my wildest dream did I think that he would one day use them against me. If he ever leaked them, it wouldn't just hurt me. It would tarnish my family's reputation too. Peter knew this too, which is why he knowingly threatened me with it just to get me off his back after he stole my money. As for my relationship with my sister-in-law, it's not like we're close. She lives in another city, and we don't talk that often. I guess after our breakup, Peter must have moved to the same city where my sister-in-law lives. I honestly don't know how both of them met, whether it was a coincidence or something he planned. Anyway, I do plan on having a serious conversation with my sister-in-law about Peter. I thought a lot about it and decided it's best to tell her the truth about everything. After that, it's up to her to decide what to do with the information, but I won't be able to live with myself if I don't at least try to warn her. I just hope she understands that this isn't coming from a place of trying to break them apart, but rather from a place of wanting to protect her from someone who has hurt me in ways she doesn't know yet. Update 2. I met with sister-in-law this week. I had been stewing over the right words to say for days, trying to figure out how to explain to her about everything. But before I even had the chance to speak, she told me that Peter had already apologized to her for not being upfront about his past with me. She said that after the engagement party, they had talked, and now she knew everything. I braced myself as I asked her exactly what Peter had told her. I already had an inkling that he must have lied to her and would have never told her the entire story, and unfortunately, my instincts were right. Sister-in-law went on to explain what Peter had told her, that he and I were never serious and that our relationship was nothing more than a fleeting thing. In fact, he told her that I was the one who had abused him and taken him for granted after his mother had passed away and left him homeless on the streets. He had turned the whole story around and made me out to be a villain. She told me that she was disgusted after learning the truth about me. However, she was willing to not tell my husband and the rest of the family about my true nature based on Peter's versions of events, but only if I agreed to her demands. I was taken aback. First of all, I had never wronged Peter. Secondly, she was taking his side without even asking me for my version of events. She was letting him control the narrative and had blindly accepted everything he said, without ever giving me a chance to explain myself. Next, she wanted me to agree to her demands, just to play along with her. I asked her what these supposed demands were. This is when sister-in-law started to list off certain things. She didn't want me to attend her wedding as Peter wouldn't feel comfortable to see me there. Sister-in-law wanted my husband to attend her wedding only. She said that after her marriage to Peter, she didn't want me to ever be alone in a room with her husband at any family event, as she didn't want me to seduce him. She also demanded that I never bring up my past with Peter to anyone in the family. She didn't want anyone else to find out that Peter and I had ever dated each other, as that would be embarrassing for her. Hearing her list of demands, I almost laughed out loud. Did she seriously expect me to follow these ridiculous rules? I told sister-in-law straight up that she was crazy to even ask me these things and that we didn't have to make things this difficult in the family. If she didn't want me to mention Peter or our past, I respect that. But telling me I couldn't attend her wedding or worse, that I couldn't even be in the same room as him, was just too much. I also asked her as calmly as I could manage if she had made any similar demands of Peter. Did he have to follow any rules about what he could say or do around me? Of course not. This is when sister-in-law insisted that he didn't have to because in her words, he wasn't the one still in love with me. She claimed it was me who was stuck in the past and that I was the one causing all the issues. So according to her, that's why I had to follow her demands. No questions asked. I couldn't believe it. She thought I was in love with my ex? The abusive ex who had hurt me, manipulated me, and stolen from me? I told sister-in-law straight up that she had no idea who she was getting married to. She was so quick to believe everything Peter had told her and yet she wasn't even giving me the chance to speak my side of the story. I couldn't just sit there and let her keep living in this fairy tale where Peter was the victim and I was the villain. Sister-in-law argued back, insisting that she knew her fiancé very well and that she didn't want to hear anything I had to say. She demanded that I give in to her demands and simply keep my mouth shut about my past with him from that day forward. Since sister-in-law was not ready to listen to me, I just left without arguing with her further. After that, I did tell my husband about all this. He's just as upset as I am, and since then, my husband has tried to reach out to his sister, hoping to get through to her and have a real conversation. He wants to make her understand where we're coming from, but she's been completely unresponsive. It's like Peter has manipulated her so much that she's shutting us out. She won't even give us a chance to explain and have a rational discussion. It's frustrating and painful, especially because she's family and she has never behaved like this before. We just don't understand how she can be so quick to close the door on us. Update 3. Okay, so it's been 2 months since my last update, and guess what? A lot of things have happened. First of all, my sister-in-law sent out wedding invites and didn't send me one. What made it even worse was that my husband did receive an invite, but it was without the option for a +1. This felt like a clear message that she was intentionally excluding me, and it stung. Up until that point, we had been trying to find a way to resolve things with her, hoping she would eventually come around and see reason. But at that point, my husband decided he had no choice but to reach out to his parents for help. We knew we had to let them know the truth about Peter and our past, especially considering how sister-in-law was treating me at first. We didn't reveal everything to them, just that Peter and I had a past and that this was the reason why I had been excluded from sister-in-law's upcoming wedding. When we spoke to my in-laws, they were shocked, of course, but they could also understand things from my perspective. Mother-in-law decided to reach out to sister-in-law and talk to her about it, but turns out sister-in-law apparently told her that the only reason I wasn't invited to her wedding was because I still had feelings for Peter and that she didn't want me to sabotage their wedding. After I heard this from my in-laws, I was appalled. Sister-in-law had also asked my in-laws to cut me off and told them that they needed to choose her over me if they ever wanted to continue to have her and Peter in their lives. This is when my husband and I decided that we needed to tell my in-laws the full story. We couldn't just let sister-in-law and Peter get away with such blatant manipulations. So we shared everything with mother-in-law and father-in-law, the truth about Peter, what he had done to me, and how he had manipulated and abused me during our relationship. We explained how he had taken advantage of me, how he had used me for everything I had, and how he was now doing the same to my sister-in-law. He was a scumbag, and my in-laws deserved to know exactly who they were dealing with. When my in-laws heard everything, they were furious, just like us. They didn't want someone like Peter to be a part of our family. When they confronted sister-in-law with all this information, initially, she tried to defend her fiancé, but, thankfully, my in-laws quickly saw through the lies. And this is how my in-laws have slowly found out that sister-in-law is also a victim of Peter's manipulations, just like I was. Since the start of their relationship, she has been supporting Peter financially, paying for their rent and other expenses while he spends all his money on playing online games and gambling. Worse yet, she also has a joint account with him where she deposits most of the money and he takes advantage of that. My in-laws were understandably livid and made it clear to her and that this was not in any way a healthy relationship. She needed to call off the wedding immediately. They told her that if she chose to go ahead with marrying him, they would no longer be paying for the wedding. Mother-in-law warned her that they would be calling the caterers, the venue, the bakers, and canceling everything since they had paid for it. They also made it clear to sister-in-law that if she went through with the wedding even after this, she would then be completely cut off from their inheritance. Father-in-law firmly told her that he didn't want someone like Peter to benefit from what he was working so hard for. In the end, my sister-in-law had no choice but to agree to their demands. Currently, she has called off the wedding reluctantly, and while I'm sure she's furious with me, she hasn't reached out to me yet. I don't know where we stand now, but at least I know that my in-laws now know the truth about Peter. I feel a sense of relief that sister-in-law will no longer be marrying that man. I'm sure things will never be the same between us, but at least I did everything I could to make sure she didn't make the same mistakes I did. Update 4. A week after the wedding was called off, Peter reached out to me. And this time, he sent me an email to my work address, which he probably found from my LinkedIn page, since I have him blocked from everywhere else. In the email, Peter wrote that I had ruined his life, that I was the reason he wasn't going to marry my sister-in-law, and that I had taken away his one chance for a better life. He accused me of interfering in his plans and went on to say that he would find a way to get back at me and make me suffer for what I have done to him. Reading his words made my blood run cold. His anger was palpable, and his threats were so similar to the things he had done to me in the past: manipulative, aggressive, and vengeful. I could feel my heart racing as I thought about what he could potentially do next, especially if he still had those intimate pictures of us. It terrified me to think that he might use them to get back at me, just as he had threatened before. I showed the email to my husband, and when he read it, he was absolutely livid. After discussing it together, we both have agreed that we can't let Peter get away with this anymore. We've decided it's time to teach him a lesson once and for all. We are currently in the process of consulting with a lawyer to explore our options. We want to make sure Peter understands that his actions have consequences, and we are determined to protect ourselves from any further threats or intimidation. It's a scary feeling knowing that Peter is still out there,